Okay, I guess good morning. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 of you there. 2, yeah. So I said 5:15. We wait for 2 more minutes. Let the class go till 6:45. Hope you all don't mind. Okay, it is 7:15. Okay, we'll start. Okay, let them join. Yes, just give me a moment. I'll be there. Okay. So hope you all remember what we saw. Obviously, we were seeing different theories of atomic structures, right? So we ended up with what is that? Bohr's theory, right? So obviously, if you remember, these are all the uh, demerits of Bohr's atomic theory. So it is going to work only for single electron species. It doesn't. He took only particle nature into the picture, but it has dual nature. And obviously, I'm going for Zeeman and Stark effect, which were not explained by Bohr, right? Okay. Anyways, so we'll move on to see how first dual nature exists, right? I'm not going to talk to about the wave nature, right? Because you have already studied in physics and the interference and diffraction patterns, right? But we are going to just speak about the particle nature. Basically, I'm going to take only one this thing, okay, one of the phenomena, right? And that is going to be photoelectric effect, right? So first directly we'll see okay, right. So if you can remember what is photoelectric effect, so basically I'm going to have a metal surface, right? Now I'm going to irradiate it with the light of certain wavelength or frequency. Okay, this is going to be of light of certain wavelength lambda. Okay, fine. So generally what happens is light, when I'm saying lambda, obviously I'm considering the wave nature. But again, if they're going to have, obviously we know what is going to happen, right? So obviously when this hits the metal surface, you are going to see electrons coming out, right? So this is exactly what is called as photoelectric effect, right? So again, this proves that I'm going to follow this E is equal to mc squared. Considering that this light is made up of particles called as photons, only by that way I will be able to explain this particular phenomena. Okay, right. So anyway, so the light of certain particular wavelength of frequency hits the metal surface and the electrons are ejected out. As simple as that. This is what is called as photoelectric effect. Right. Okay. Anyways, now we are going to see in the details. Right. So the thing is, this metal, obviously you can see the electrons are going to come out not like if you, there is going to be a particular value of energy, right, which should be supplied for the electrons to come out. Right. So if you're going to supply energy anything lesser than that, right, you will not see photoelectric effect happening. And obviously if you're going to supply more energy than what is required, then and obviously then only you will be able to see this electrons ejecting out. Right. So that minimum this thing, what is that minimum energy required to take out the electron, right, is what is called as your work function. Right. That minimum energy required for taking out an electron is what is called as your work function psi. Right. So this is what is called as your work function. Right. Work function is means what? That is the minimum energy required to take out the electron. Right. So if I talk in terms of frequency, right, if I talk in terms of frequency, this psi I can write it as some h nu. Okay. Now this nu is the minimum frequency which should be possessed by the photons. Right. This nu is the minimum frequency which must be possessed by the protons. Sorry, by the light photons, so that the photoelectric effect happens. Right. So this I'm going to give some special name to this frequency, and obviously hope you all remember that is what is called as your threshold frequency. Right. It's going to be called as threshold frequency. Okay. So threshold frequency is the minimum frequency which must be possessed by the light for photoelectric effect to happen. As simple as that. Okay. So if you're going to provide energy exactly equal to exactly equal to the work function, that is, if the frequency is possessed frequency possessed by the photons is exactly equal to the threshold frequency, you will just see that the electrons are going to come to the surface. Okay. But if you want them ejected out completely, and if you want them moving, the energy supplied should be greater than the work function. Right. Should be greater than the work function. Then you can ask me, sir, where is the energy going? Like the energy of conservation should be satisfied. Correct. Right. So this energy supplied, right, if it is greater than this, obviously somehow the portion of energy is going to get satisfied by this. Right. The other remaining energy supplied is going to be transferred in terms of kinetic energy of these electrons, because the electrons are moving, isn't it? So I would say, if I write the energy conservation equation, right, I can tell the energy of the photons, right, will be equal to the work function plus the kinetic energy of the electrons. Right. Kinetic energy of the electrons. Now if I just write it in terms of frequencies and this thing, so I can write h nu, this is the frequency possessed by the photons, will be equal to h nu naught plus half m v square. Okay. So again, I can have questions coming from this particular equation also. Okay. H nu is equal to h nu naught plus half mv square. Obviously, that's an energy conservation equation. Pretty simple, right? So yeah, that is about your photoelectric effect. Done. Okay, cool. So now moving on, right? Again, obviously, the wave nature is explained by interference and diffractions, polarization, all these things. Okay, fine. Now we'll see what de Broglie proposed. Okay, so de Broglie's hypothesis. Okay, So what he said, obviously, is going to talk about the dual nature of the light, right? And obviously dual nature of electrons. Okay, so what he said is, since nature is symmetrical, right, and so is light. That's the exact statement he said. I'll repeat it. Since nature is symmetrical, and so is light. So what do you mean by nature is symmetrical? So we know we have good, bad, man, women, what else? Heads, tails, right? So I can just keep on going, right? So the entire universe or the entire nature is symmetrical, night, day, right? So like this, since the nature is symmetrical, it's the so is light. Okay, so it might look, actually he's not as exactly a scientific guy, he was actually a philosopher. Okay, but when he told the statements, all the particle nature was like extensively proved by on its own, and the wave nature was also proved on its like separately proved, right? So the only thing he did is that he took both these ideas and he combined it, and for that he got a Nobel Prize. What can I say, right? Okay, so you know how the two famous equations are: E is equal to mc squared for the particle nature, and E is equal to hc by lambda, or E is equal to h nu for the wave nature, right? So he just combined both of them, right? So you will be getting de Broglie's wavelength lambda. If you just equate them both, right, you'll get the lambda value as h by mv. Now I'm not going to use c, because c is only for light. If at all you're going to use for any other system, then the velocity of that particular system you will be using here, right? Or I can even write h by p. Very simple. P is okay. I hope you understand. P is the momentum. P is equal to mv. P is the momentum here. Okay, right? Fine. Actually, I forgot one very important point in this. That is your um, limitations of Bohr's theory. And the main, or the one of the most important problems was Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Okay, we'll actually speak about it now. Right, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle was also um, a problem, was a demerit in terms of your this thing, Bohr's theory, demerit of Bohr's theory, right? So fine. So dual nature we first found out, right? This is what we saw first, photoelectric effect, and then we saw de Broglie's hypothesis. We found out what is de Broglie's wavelength lambda, right? And then now we are going to see what does Heisenberg said, right? So please take down the statement, people. It's a very important statement. Heisenberg's principle. I'm just writing is Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Okay, so please take down. If you just understand the statement, then you'll understand how is it a demerit for your Bohr's theory. Please check to the statement. Right. Two conjugate quantities, or two conjugate physical quantities, two conjugate physical quantities cannot be measured, cannot be measured simultaneously with 100% accuracy, simultaneously with 100% accuracy. Okay, so the statement says you cannot measure two conjugate physical quantities simultaneously with 100% accuracy. Okay, now if you want to understand what exactly are conjugate quantities, we are not that evolved in, I mean, not in the sense that maybe you don't have much physics knowledge to understand what exactly is a conjugate quantity, so you don't have to worry about it. There are now, for now, we are going to have two sets of conjugate quantities. One is position and momentum, okay, and position and momentum. And one more thing is your energy and time. So these two sets are going to be called as conjugate quantities, right? So what Heisenberg says is that when you want to measure the position of a particle and the momentum of a particle simultaneously, right? So at the same time, I'm measuring both the quantities, you will not be able to measure them with 100% accuracy. There will always be some error, right? Okay. Now, if you look at Bohr's theory, right, he was actually able to find what is the position, the radius, and all he found out, right? Oh God, I forgot about the momentum part. I'm really sorry, guys. There is a formula which I forgot to tell you. Please take down. Okay, just let me write it somewhere. Okay. Actually, it should have been in the first itself. I should have told you. So he said that even the angular momentum of the electrons in the stationary orbits is quantized. Okay, so we know how to what is the formula for angular momentum. MVR is going to get quantized. The obviously quantized means it is going to depend on, it is going to be an integral multiple of a small value, right? So MVR n is equal to NH by 2 pi. Okay, right? MVR is equal to NH by 2 pi. Please remember the formula, right? This is not a demerit, guys. This I forgot. This is also a formula. Okay, MVR is the angular momentum of the electron, which is also quantized, is equal to NH by 2 pi. Okay, right. Now coming back, so now you can understand that Bohr, according to his calculations, was able to calculate both position as well as momentum accurately according to his theory, but Heisenberg, according to his principle, it is not going to be valid. Okay, there will always going to be some error. That too, if the size of the particle going to keep on reducing. For example, if we talk about us, right? So generally, say Newton and mechanics will be able to calculate. For example, if I'm moving at this speed, I'm here, I'm there, momentum, position, everything can be calculated, right? Then you say that Heisenberg's principle is not going to work. It's not like that. If the particle size is pretty high, then the error value will be less, right? But as the particle size keeps on reducing, right, you will see that the error becomes more and more and more prominent. Okay, so obviously if I'm going to go for subatomic levels, definitely you will have considerable amount of errors popping up if you're going to try to measure these two quantities simultaneously. Okay, now that, so if at all I have to give it mathematically, he said del x is what is uncertainty in position, or say del x is what is going to be the error in measurement of position, right? Del x into the product in measuring and product of I mean, this is the uncertainty in momentum, right, will always be greater than or equal to h by 4 pi. Okay, that means this value can never be zero, in the sense that if you try to measure them separately, maybe one thing will be zero, but if you try to measure them simultaneously, there will always be some error, and this is the minimum error value which you can have. Okay, h by 4 pi, right? Same goes with energy and time. Del E into del T will always be greater than or equal to h by 4 pi. Okay, so that is about your Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, right? So we saw all the demerits of Bohr's atomic theory, right? So all these are important, people. Everywhere it's just gonna be formulas and questions are gonna come, as simple as that. Very simple, right? And this equation I'll be able to rewrite in this way. Okay, something like this. So I write it here, right? So if I rewrite this, del x, nothing I can do, and you see this del p, I can write it as m del v, because obviously mass is not going to change unless and until you're going to see go for Einstein's theory of relativity, right? We're going to see that. Okay, so now del x into m del v will be greater than or equal to h by 4 pi. Okay, and guys, if they ask you in the questions, how will they ask you is they will be giving one of the values and they ask you to find the other value. Do not worry about the greater than symbol. Just make it equal to h by 4 pi and then do the problem. Is that okay? Right, fine. So yeah, that is about everything. And now we are going for the last part. Okay, the quantum mechanical theory. right? It is developed by Schrodinger. Okay, so any questions till now? Okay, fine, good. So last part is your quantum mechanical theory. Okay, quantum mechanical theory. Now here again, for us to deeply understand this, we don't have enough physics knowledge or the mathematics knowledge, right? You, if you maybe go to college, you'll be studying about Laplace transforms, Fourier transforms, and all that. Maybe again, if you go for the college first year, right, you will be actually studying. You need to know some partial derivatives and stuff also for you to completely understand what exactly is quantum mechanical theory, right? So even I am not that good at it, because like if you look at my area of interest where I do research, right, it is definitely not going to be in this, because it's pretty much a physics rather than chemistry, right? But anyways, right, if you're really interested in physics and chemistry, then this might be your area, right? If at all you're going to study science as your major, right? Okay, fine. So what it says, right, so this is going to take into account the wave nature, right, and it is going to explain all these stuff, right? Fine. So okay, so it says that there is going to be so every orbit, right, every orbit, or I will just tell you what is orbit and orbitals. Okay, so every orbit is going to have its own kind of wave function. See, it's, please remember that wave function we saw in photoelectric effect is different from here. Okay, so this wave function talks about the type of wave. Say for example, something like this you will be able to get, right? For one is orbitals, one is orbital something like this, you'll be able to get. Okay, so anyway, so we're just going to talk about how the wave exists for a particular orbit. Say first shell, second shell, third shell, right? All these things. Okay, but only with this psi we'll not be able to do anything, because it doesn't have any physical meaning. Okay, so remember that this quantum mechanical model is a probabilistic theory, right? In the sense that it is going to go hand in hand with your Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. It is not going to tell you for sure, okay, I'll be able to find the electron here. It might just tell you that, okay, this is this 80% chance that electron might be here, or 70% chance that electron might be here. So something like that. It is going to be a probabilistic model. Okay, and that is the main reason why it actually is one of, it's actually, we are still following it. Okay, since it is probabilistic, right? Okay, fine. So what am I going to do if this psi is not going to be of any use to me? What is going to be of use is this psi squared. And one more thing, guys, what I want to tell you, this psi is not a number, right? It's a function. So a function in the sense it's going to be like this psi of x, right? Psi of y. This is a sine of x, cos of x, something like that. Sine and cos are functions. Like this is also going to be a function, right? So this psi squared, if you just square the function and use it, right? If you just square the function and use it, right? Now that is gonna give me what is wrong. Okay, so that is going to give me the probability of finding the electron, right? This is going to give the probability of finding the electron in a particular volume, right? So again, I like, there is nothing much for you to know in this. Okay, like, I mean, in the sense that there is a lot of stuff, but for you to completely understand how this works, you require some more mathematical knowledge, which we don't have at this particular point of time. If you have in college, then you'll be able to really appreciate it. Okay, fine. So moving on, right? So what I am going to what I am interested in is this input values, right? You are giving some input values to this function, right? Those input values are actually going to be 4 values, and these 4 values, actually 3 values, not 4 values. These 3 values are what are going to be your quantum numbers. Okay, so these quantum numbers are actually going to help me find out the probability of finding the electrons. Okay, right, fine. So we'll directly go for quantum numbers. Fine. So first quantum number is what is your principal quantum number, right? It is denoted by the letter capital N. Okay. So now remember, each of these quantum numbers are going to are going to answer one question. Okay. So what is that? What is the question? This is going to answer is what is the main shell in which the electron is present? Either it's going to be the first shell or the second shell, or basically it's going to talk about the stationary orbit as predicted by your Bohr's theory. Okay, so what is the main shell? That is the question answered by your principal quantum number. Okay, now remember this n value can take values from 1, it cannot be 0. Okay, it has to take values from 1, it can go to 2, up to any integer is going to be fine, right? So if you find that a particular electron has a principal quantum number of 1, that means this electron is in the first shell, or in your different terminologies, it is going to be in the K shell, right? If you find that the electron is going to be there in the second shell, or say if you when the principal quantum number is 2, that means the electron is there in the second shell, or in other words, it's going to be in the L shell. Okay, fine. So that is about your principal quantum number, right? Obviously, the energy of the electron, right? Energy of the electron is actually, okay, fine. We'll not talk about energy now. We'll speak about it later. So basically, this is the question answered with the principal quantum number. Okay, fine. Now, the second one is what is my azimuthal quantum number. Okay, so azimuthal quantum number is denoted by the letter L. Okay, now what is the question it's just going to answer is it's going to tell me what is the subshell. Okay, right? So out of nowhere, how the subshells came, actually this was one of the problems with Bohr's theory. Actually there's one more this thing I forgot, not an important one, but still very important with respect to subshells, right? So what happened is when Bohr gave the spectrum, when he used the spectrometer, it was not that much of a sophisticated spectrometer. Okay, so if I just used if when scientists use sophisticated with say high efficiency spectrometer, right, say that, you know, for example, if I have some n1, I have n2, say if the electron is coming like this, obviously some energy is going to get released, and if you record in a spectrum, you are going to get a single line. That's what we expect, correct? But if I just zoom here and see, this particular line was a combination of so many small lines. Okay, again I repeat, this is one single line which we expect from your Bohr spectrum, right? But if I just zoom in and use the fine spectrum with a little more sophisticated what is that instrument, spectrometer, they saw that it was actually a combination of small lines which makes up the bigger line. Okay, so obviously this is where the concept of subshells or orbitals came into the picture. Okay, so anyways, so the azimuthal quantum number answers the question of what is the subshell, right? Okay, fine. Cool. So now how is it going to answer? It's pretty simple. Now the azimuthal quantum number value is going to depend on what is the principal quantum number value. Okay, so L value can start with 0. Okay, and it can go to 1, it can go to 2, up to maximum value can be n minus 1. Okay, so obviously I told you the maximum value of azimuthal quantum number is going to depend on what is the principal quantum number, correct? Okay, fine. So fine. So now each value of this azimuthal quantum number gives me 111 subshell. Please remember, when I have L is equal to 0, right? So when I have L is equal to 0, this corresponds to S subshell, right? So when you have L is equal to 1, that corresponds to P subshell. L is equal to 2 corresponds to D subshell, and L is equal to 3 corresponds to F. L is equal to 4 corresponds to G subshell. Anyways, we are not going to study about this. Okay, so SPDF we already know, right? Okay, L is equal to 1, L is equal to 2, 3, SPDF respectively. Okay, say for example, if I'm going to take, you already know this, just to take, so if at all I'm going to have n is equal to 2, the possible L values can be 0, right? Possible L values can be 0, 1, and that's it, right? It's 0 to n minus 1, that's it. So what do you mean is the second shell, oops, right? So what do you mean is when I go for the second shell, it has only two subshells. One is S, another one is P. Same way, if I had n is equal to 1, I had L is equal to 0 is the only possibility. That means in the first shell, I can have only S orbital. So hope you understand. That's why I have 1s, then I don't have 1p. I have 2s, 2p, but no 2d. When I go to 3, I have 3s, 3p, 3d, but no 3f, right? But when I go for 4, all the three are available. F, S, P, D, F, all three are available. Okay, right? So obviously this answers the question of what is the azimuthal quantum number. I mean, sorry, what is the subshell? With the help of azimuthal quantum number, we'll be able to find out. Cool, right? Fine. Now talking about energy, right? So if you ask me, we are going to study about Aufbau's principle and stuff, which says that, anyways. So we'll talk about it there maybe, but anyways, I can just give you a heads up, right? So remember, energy value of the orbital, right, is going to depend on, is directly proportional to the n plus L value. Please remember this, right? The energy of the electron or in a particular subshell, or say in a shell, will be directly proportional to n plus L value. Okay, now if you find that two orbitals are having same n plus L value, then only you are going for the shell with higher principal quantum number will have higher energy. Okay, now this you are going to go only if I have same n plus L value. Please remember that. Okay, only if we have same n plus L value, then you have to look at the principal quantum number. Whichever has higher principal quantum number is going to have higher value. If you remember this, actually you'll be able to easily draw the Aufbau's principle, like which electron, the electron has to be placed, which subshell first, which subshell next, right? All these things can be easily calculated. Okay, fine. So that is about your azimuthal quantum number. Then comes your magnetic quantum number. Okay, it is denoted by the letter small m. Okay, fine. Now this magnetic quantum number tells me how many electrons, right, can be placed in a particular subshell. Okay, how many what is the maximum number of electrons which can be placed in a particular subshell? That is what is given by your magnetic quantum number. Okay, or in other words, it is actually going to tell me what is the number of energy states, or I would say what is the number of orbitals per, okay, well, should I use orbital? No, it is better to use the energy states. Okay, how many number of energy states are present for each and every subshell, right? Now please understand, for each, when you have, for each energy state, right, I can place 2 electrons in this. Okay, for each energy state I can place 2 electrons. So if at all I have n number of energy states, 2n will be the maximum number of electrons which can be placed. Okay, now I think again this magnetic quantum number is going to be, it is going to depend on what is the principal quantum number, right? So that m value is pretty simple, right? M can take values from minus L to plus L. Right. So for example, when I go for L is equal to 0, right? L is equal to 0. That means this corresponds to S orbital. Now only possible M value is 0, right? So remember, the value of this is not important, right? Basically, this is going to give me, one other words, it is going to give me the orientation, or I would say this is going to give me the shape of the orbitals also in some sense. Okay, so M is equal to 0 means it is symmetric. That's what you need to understand. Okay, anyways, we'll not go into so much details, right? So if for L is equal to 0, that is corresponding to s orbital, I have only one value of m, that is 0. Okay, that means there is only one energy state. The value of the magnetic quantum number doesn't matter, but how many magnetic quantum numbers you have, that's what matters. Okay, now I have only one value of magnetic quantum number, right? Okay, so obviously that means there can be only one energy state, right? So maximum I'll be able to put 2 electrons in s orbital. That's how it comes, right? Same way when I go for L is equal to 1, that is corresponding to p orbital, I can have -1, 0, +1. So you see there are 3 possible values for the p orbitals. 3 energy states are possible. So one energy state 2 electrons, that means p orbital can have a maximum of 6 electrons. So if you calculate for d, you will see that the maximum energy possible is, maximum number of electrons possible is 10. For f it is 14. So it's so on and so forth. Okay, so the last one, which is not going to be part of the Schrodinger's equation, but it was later found out, was the spin quantum number. Right, so as the name tells you, it is okay. As the name tells you, it is going to talk about the direction of the spin. Okay, it is gonna talk about direction of the spin. Obviously, there can be only two possible directions. One is going to be anti-clockwise, another would be clockwise. So S can take only 2 values, say -half and +half. Only these 2 are the values possible, and you can assign anything for anything. Basically, this can be clockwise or anti-clockwise, and this can be again anti-clockwise or clockwise. But again, if you say that this is clockwise, right, this is going to be anti-clockwise, and ulta. If this is anti-clockwise, this would have been clockwise. There is no restriction that -half should be like clockwise only, or say +half should be anti-clockwise only. There is no restriction like that. Okay, right. So these are all the 4 principal quantum numbers, and the first 3 are going to be the inputs for the chi-squared function. Right. This is actually just to determine the spin, and the importance of this will be given by your Pauli's exclusion principle. Right. Okay, fine. Now, how do you fill electrons? We already know how to fill electrons, but there are going to be certain rules alone. That alone we'll see. Okay, and obviously you're going to see about there is something about the shapes of the orbitals. Again, I'm not going to speak about it because you already know what are the shapes of the orbitals. S orbital is spherical, p orbital is dumbbell shaped, d orbital is double shaped, except for dz squared. Okay, there is going to be a ring and all that. Okay, fine. So what I was telling is, we are going to see what are the rules. First one, rules for writing the electronic configuration in terms of in terms of SPDF, right? Sub orbitals, right? The first one is of Boss principle. Right, so Aufbau's principle says that the electrons must be placed in lower energy orbitals first, and then only you have to go for higher energy orbitals. Now I told you how to decide the lower energy, higher energy. E is directly proportional to n plus L, right? And if you find that for 2 orbitals the n plus values are n plus L values are same, then you have to go for the higher n value. The energy wise. Okay, so that's about Aufbau's principle. We already know. The next one is Hund's rule, right? Hund's rule of maximum multiplicity, right? So it says if at all you are going to go for degenerate orbitals, right? If you're going to go for degenerate, I hope you know what is degenerate orbitals. These are higher energy orbitals. Okay, so if you're going to go for degenerate orbitals, you say for example, if you go for px, py, and pz. Right, so what he says is that if at all you're going to do here, you are going to fill the electrons first singly, and then only pairing has to happen. Okay, we already know this, just giving you a refresh, right? So when you go for degenerate orbitals like px, py, pz, or dx, y, z, xz, z squared, and x squared minus y squared, all the orbitals must be singly filled first, and then only pairing has to happen, right? And the last one, here, right? So the last one is what is my Hans rule, Pauli's exclusion principle. Okay, Pauli's exclusion principle. Right now, what it says is that no two electrons, right? No two electrons can have all the quantum numbers to be same. Okay, that means at least one of the quantum numbers is going to be different. And hopefully you understand, if I take any one of the orbital and check, at least even though this is going to be px, right? Say this is going to have m is equal to say -1, right? Right, and L is equal to say 0, sorry 1, right? And say this is 2p which I'm talking about, right? But you see at least the spin quantum numbers must be different. One is plus half, the other one is minus half. Okay, so that is what is told by your Pauli's exclusion principle, right? Okay, now there can be one more thing about the nodes. Okay, so nodes are basically, these are the points where the probability of finding electron is 0. Correct, right? So there can be two types of nodes. Okay, when I say nodes, nodes are the points or the planes in which probability of finding electron is 0. You cannot find any electrons here, right? So these nodes can be of two types. One, what are called as radial nodes, right? The next one are what are called as angular nodes. Okay, please bear with this angular, right? So nodes can be of two types. Radial nodes are angular nodes. Okay, so if at all you want to visualize what exactly are these, right? Say when I go for example 1s, right? 1s is completely spherical like this. Okay, it doesn't have any no radial node, no angular node, right? But when I go for 2s, right, you will see something like this, right? You will see, oh God. Okay, okay, this is how 2s will look. Okay, so basically you see in this area, right, the area which I am marking, you will see no electrons are present, right? Now this are what are called as radial nodes, right? These kind of nodes are what are called as radial nodes. Okay, right. Say now when I go for say something like a dz squared has both. Okay, let me tell you. Or if I just like understand first p orbitals. Okay, say this is some px or py or pz, whatever it is. Now you see in the center, I see there is nothing. Okay, now these kind of nodes are what are going to be your angular nodes. Okay, now let me tell you a case where both angular as well as radial nodes are present, right? Now it's pretty simple for us, right? So if I take dx squared, I mean z squared, so you know dz squared is going to look like this. Oh God. Okay, there is going to be a ring, right? So obviously you see at the center of the double of the dumbbell, you see there is a angular node, and if you see in the ring, like in the ring surrounding it, there is going to be an radial node. Okay, so radial node should be in the form of a circle, and angular node should be some. So I hope you understand. I'm not able to exactly put it in words, right? It should be where two lobes meet, something like that. Okay, so this center is my angular node, and in the center what you have is your radial node. Okay, now I'm going to give you a shortcut to find the number of angular nodes and number of radial nodes in any orbital given, right? Okay, Now for angular nodes, number of angular nodes in an orbital is given by L. Okay, the azimuthal quantum number value. For example, if you take for s orbitals will never have any angular nodes because L is equal to 0, right? But they might have radial nodes. Okay, so anyways, now number of angular nodes is given by the L value, right? And the number of radial nodes, right, is equal to n minus L minus 1. So these two formulas you have to remember. Okay, number of angular nodes is equal to L. The number of radial nodes is L n minus L minus 1. Okay, for example, you can calculate. You said that for 2s, right? For 2s, I had one radial node. Correct. So for 2s, to substitute here, n is equal to 2, L is equal to 0, minus 1. You will see the value as 1. One radial node is present, and obviously there is no angular node for 2s orbitals. Okay, so yeah, that is about the chapter. Right? So any questions, people? The chapter is over. Okay, now we'll do some problems. Is there any questions?
No, sir.
Okay, fine. So wait, let me bring some problems. Second. Guys, did you feel that I went so fast? Hope I'm not muted. Okay, right. So yeah, did you guys feel that I went really some far, like so fast that you didn't understand? Was it okay? Something in the chat. Okay,
No, sir.
fine. Okay, now I generally I don't do like this. I don't go this fast. But this chapter you have already done chemical bonding and stuff, and this and all should not be a problem. That's why I little went fast. But again, whenever I had to slow down, I slowed down. I think Bohr's theory and all that maybe you wouldn't have remembered. So, anyways, cool. So we will go for it. Okay, let me send you in the groups. And as Steve Stevenson asked, I don't know who was it, so I will send it straight, not tilted. Yes, we are going to do 3 questions. Let me mark it. Okay, so I've sent it. 6, 8, and 9. Okay, first we'll start with 6th question. So it's all about formulas in this chapter. If you remember the formula, you're set. And little theory there and there. right? So look at the sixth question. The threshold frequency for a metal is this much. The radiation of this much hits the metal. Find the kinetic energy of the emitted electron. Okay, so this is from photoelectric effect, obviously, right? So use the equation. They're not asking you anything. It's a simple problem. If they asked you velocity of the electrons, then you might have taken roots because I have v squared and all that. But now they are directly asking you what is the kinetic energy of electrons only. So don't worry about it, right? Just go. Hope you remember the equation. H nu is equal to H nu naught, right? Plus kinetic energy. So H nu is H, I mean, nu is given, nu naught is given, H value you know, calculate. So I think the numbers are given in such a way that the calculation will be a little easy only. So you can calculate.
Sir, is it option D?
Option D. Okay, let me check.
D, sir.
Ah, yeah, D for dog. Correct. So let me check. Yeah, 1, 2 into 10 to the power minus 19. Yeah, D is the correct answer. Yes, correct. Okay, so guys, do you want me to calculate here? I mean, do you want me to show how is it? It's just going to be a formula substitution, right? So I can write it like this: H H into nu minus nu naught okay. Oh god, 1 second. Right, this is the formula. H into nu minus nu naught is what is equal to kinetic energy. Correct. So it will be 6.6 into 10 to the power minus 34 into the new value, the what is the whatever the incident energy, that is 10 to the power minus 15, right, minus what is the threshold energy, 7 into 10 to the power minus 14, or I can write it as 0.7 into 10 to the power 50. That's it. Okay, so if you calculate, you should be getting the answer approximately as 2 into 10 to the power minus 19 joules. Okay, now go to the eighth question.
So is it option C?
Option C, let me check. Eighth question. Yeah, correct. Option C is correct. Right. So the question says in an atom, electron is moving with a speed of 600 meter per second with an accuracy of this much only. With this much is the accuracy, right? So that means when you want to calculate error, it's going to be 1 minus this, or 100 minus this percentage will be the error percentage. Hope you understand what I'm trying to say, right? Okay, so calculate the what is it? The calculate the certainty which the position of the electron can be located, right? So now actually you don't have to worry about whether it's going to be certainty or uncertainty. See, the only thing which is going to change is if I talk in terms of uncertainty, you have to put a greater sign, h by 4 pi. Right, but if it is going to be in terms of certainties, the accuracy part, you just have to reverse the sign. In this case, it is going to be like this. That's it. But anyways, you just have to make it equal in the problems. That's it. So take 0.5 percentage of 600, not 0.5, 0.0005 percentage of 600. That is the uncertainty in velocity. That means you have to calculate. So if I write it properly, so this is gonna be del x is what we have to find out into del v is equal to h by 4 pi m. I can write it like this because you know m will be outside of the uncertainty, the delta, right? So this is gonna be m. Okay, so you have to substitute the values. You have to find what is this del x. That's what you need to find. And del v will be 0.00. Okay, 0.005 divided by 100, right, into 600. Okay, fine. So that would have been the del v value. So if you calculate, you're going to get the answer as 1.92 into 10 to the power minus 3. That's as you can see, it was asked in IEEE 2009. Okay. Next, ninth question.
So B.
Okay, let me check. Ninth is B. Yeah, correct. Okay, so this question is from de Broglie's, right? Lambda is equal to h by mv. Okay, so everything is given. So they just want the wavelength, right? Mass of the proton is given 1.6 into minus 27 kgs. H value, you know, 6.6 into minus 34. Divided by m is this. V is also given 1 into the minus 3. So if you just substitute, you are going to get the answer as 0.4 nanometers. Right? Basically, you'll be getting the answer in meters, but according to the choice, you want the answer in terms of nanometers. So accordingly, you will substitute. Okay, just a formula substitution, nothing else. And see guys, don't think like the questions are really easy. So this is how the questions will be asked, right? But if you look at the broader picture, you have so much to remember. So this is also going to add up to the list, the formulas. That's it. Okay, other than that, there is no difficulty at all in doing the problems, right? Pretty simple chapter, very simple chapter. Okay, fine. Moving on, we will go. I'm finding good questions from Bohr's theory. Give you the questions, then I'll choose it. Fine. Now, which questions I can do? This. So I marked 4 questions, guys. So the question numbers are 8, 11, 15, and 16. Okay, if you look at the 8th question, it says the wave number of spectral line of a given transition is x per centimeter for helium plus. So they're asking for the same transition. So same N1, same N2. They're asking what will be the value for Be3 plus, beryllium 3 plus. Okay, any answers, people? So nothing. So I have just this 1 by lambda. One by lambda is what is your wave number? Right, which is equal to RH Z squared into 1 by N1 squared minus 1 by N2 squared. Now this particular thing is going to be common. Right, this, okay guys, 1 second. So this particular value is going to be constant because they're giving you, it's going to be the same transition, right? So for nu of, what is it, helium plus is given as x. Okay, so I just
Option B.
option B. Okay, we'll check. Right. So nu of Be3 plus, I don't know what is it. Okay. So that if I just write it, it would be RH. RH. Okay, RH will get cancelled, right? If you just divide these two, so only thing which is going to vary is z squared. Right. So this z of this thing is 2. So z squared will be 4. For beryllium, it is 4. So it is 16. Right. So that is equal to x divided by whatever the value, the nu of Be3, nu bar of Be3 plus. Right. So this would be 4 times. So this will come here. Yeah, 4x. 4x is the answer. Correct. Okay, pretty easy, straightforward question. Right. So next question. What did I give you? Where is it? Oh, yeah. So next was 11th question. Correct? Yeah. So 11th question is ionization energy of this much. I mean, helium plus is this much, right? They're asking what is the energy of first stationary orbit of Li2 plus. Actually, even if they didn't give you the first statement, you will be able to calculate whatever is the energy of the first stationary orbit of Li2 plus. Right? It's just going to be a formula. And you remember, you see the answer is in terms of joules. Oh, no. Okay, now there's a small thing here. See, understand this. The answer is given in terms of joules per atom, right? So, but when we go for the actual values, it will be in terms of joules per mole. Okay, so we know actually the ionization energy is k, just kz squared, nothing else, right? So just find out this k, right, and then substitute it in the energy En, which is equal to k z squared by n squared. Okay, now this is given as what is how much? This is given as, where is the question? Yeah, so this is given as 19.6 into 10 to the power 18 minus 18, right? Okay, so minus 18 joule per atom. So you know what is z squared for helium? Here z in z will be 2, so z squared will be 4. So basically k value will be 19.6 divided by 4 into 10 to the power minus 18, right? Okay, so that's done. Now use this k value here, right, and change the z value. Z is equal to 3 now. They'll be asking for Li2 plus, right, and they're asking for first stationary orbit. So that will be again 19.6 divided by 4 into 10 to the power minus 18, right, 10 to the power minus 18, and z squared z for lithium is 3, so z squared will become 9. So this, if you calculate, that would have been the answer. Okay, right, again a straightforward question. Two formulas you have to use, one for ionization energy, find the k, and then use it in the energy of the nth stationary orbit equation. Right. Okay, now go for 15th question.
So
Yeah,
I can't get the last step, so
you cannot get the last step. Pretty simple. So you found out the k. Yeah, you found the k value. Done from this. There is no doubt in that.
yes, sir. No doubt.
Okay. Now, if you go for the energy of nth orbit, this is the formula for energy of nth orbit. Okay. Now you substitute the k value, whatever you found from the previous equation. Now Z for lithium, they're asking for lithium only, right? Lithium for Z is equal to 3. So Z squared will become 9. And n squared, they're asking for first stationary orbit. So n squared will be 1. That's why. That's it. You just have to calculate this. Understood?
So they have already given kz square value, no, sir. So why we are substituting?
They
for Z square?
have. No, you cannot use the kz squared. No, Z value will be different for helium and lithium, right?
Oh, got it, sir.
Z for helium is 2, Z for lithium is 3. That's why we're not directly using it. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Right. Okay, go to the 15th question. Okay, so they're telling in Lyman series, the shortest wavelength of hydrogen atom appears at x meters. Okay, hope you remember what is the condition for shortest wavelength, what is the condition for longest wavelength, right? So they're asking what is the longest wavelength in Balmer series of He plus ion. Okay, I'll give you some time, go for it, or I'll just give you what are the conditions again. Maybe you would have forgotten. For lambda minimum, right, n2 value should be infinity. For lambda max, n2 value is n1 plus 1. Okay, now obviously they have given two different series. One is Lyman, another is Balmer, and the first one was for hydrogen, second one is for helium, right? Yeah, helium, right? So use it. 1 by lambda is equal to RH Z squared into 1 by N1 squared minus 1 by N2 squared. And tell me the answer.
Sir, is it the last option?
5x by 9. Okay, let me check. 15th question. Allah. Actually, it's exactly ulta of that. A is the answer. 9x by 5. Okay, fine. So I think I can help you out in this. Right. So we are talking about minimum lambda for what is that? Minimum lambda for a hydrogen atom. Okay, first let me write the equation. So it's 1 by lambda is equal to RH Z squared into 1 by N1 squared minus 1 by N2 squared. That's it. This is the formula. Okay, so let me write it as 1 by lambda minimum for hydrogen, right? Now that is given as x, or not, it's given as 1 by x, is it not? Lambda value is given, so it's 1 by x Okay, so 1 by x is equal to RH. Let me keep it as RH itself because it is going to get cancelled. Now z will be 1, right? Now into 1 by n1 squared minus 1 by n2 squared. Now I told you if it's going to be minimum wavelength, n2 should be infinity, right? So 1 by infinity will become 0. So I just have RH. Okay, so 1 by x is basically going to be RH for your hydrogen atom. Okay, fine. So let me do it for 1 by lambda max for your helium. Obviously helium 2 plus, helium plus, not 2 plus. Okay, now that would be, I don't know whatever the value is, RH right? Now Z for helium is 2, so it is going to become 2 squared RH, Z squared will become 4 into 1 by n1 squared minus 1 by n2 squared. Now, okay, now one more thing I have to remember. Now this is for Lyman series, that's why I had put the n1 value as 1, right? Now remember for helium it is Balmer series, so it has to n1 is equal to 2, so it will become 1 by 4, right? Minus, now I told you for what is that, maximum wavelength, right? You have to make sure that the n2 value is n1 plus 1. Correct. So n1 plus means it should be the third shell. N1 is second shell, so n2 is the third shell. So basically it is going to become 1 by 3 squared, which will become 1 by 9. Right. So you can see from the previous equation, this RH is what? RH was basically 1 by x. Correct. That's what I got from the calculation. So instead of this RH, I'll directly put 1 by x here. Okay, that will, hopefully that makes sense. It should have been RH here, but from the previous case, I just got RH is equal to 1 by x. Okay, I'm just substituting it here, right? So if you do the calculations, so you are going to get 1 by okay, 1 by lambda max is equal to 1 by x. Obviously, you're talking about helium atom, helium plus ion, sorry, right? So 1 by x into, or wait, into 4 into 36. Now it will be 9 minus 4, which will be 5. Right? So this and this will go 9 times. So I just have 5 by 9. So I just want lambda, right? So if I just take it ulta, lambda max will be, it's actually 5x by 9. So sorry, 5 by 9x. So it is going to become 9x divided by 5. Yeah, I got the answer. Okay, 9x divided by 5. That's my lambda max value. I think hope you already understood. Just simple calculations. Okay, so yeah, answer is A, correct. Okay, so whomever gave me the answer understood. How is it 9x by 5? Where you went wrong?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Right, what is the time? 6:33. Okay, 16th question. If the radius of the Bohr's first Bohr orbit is x, then they're asking you what is the de Broglie wavelength of electron in the third orbit. Ooh. Right? It's a good question. Think about it. I'll anyways help you. Okay, if you want, okay, anyways, I'll give you some clue after 1 minute if you're not able to get anything. Okay, so the clue is you have to use three formulas. One is for angular momentum, mvr is equal to nh by 2 pi. Second formula for rn is equal to a naught n squared by z. The a naught value is, again, you are going to get in terms of 0.0529, right? And the de Broglie's wavelength, lambda is equal to h by mv. Again, I repeat, mvr is equal to nh by 2 pi, rn is equal to a naught n squared by z, and third one is your lambda, de Broglie's wavelength, lambda is equal to h by mv. So if you use all these three, you are going to get the answer. Let me see if anyone gives me the answer. Yes, any answers? Or you want some more time? Please don't sit idle. I'm giving you time for you to try and get the answer. Please do not sit idle.
Sir, 6 by x.
Correct. Wonderful. Good. Right. So let me help. Okay. So the question says radius of first Bohr orbit. Right. So again, right. Okay. Radius of first Bohr orbit. So R1. Right. So R1 is basically A naught n squared by z. This is for hydrogen atom. It is just going to be A naught, and this value is given as x. Right. Now, if I go for R3, that is the radius of the third orbit, because we're talking about third orbit here, right? So we have to use it somehow, right? So radius of this thing would be, can I say it's A naught n squared divided by z. Z is 1. Now n is 3. So can I say this is A naught is equal to z, x. So can I say it will be 9x, right? This is the radius of the third orbit, 9x, or it's going to be 9A naught, whatever it is. Okay, fine. Now, if I use MVR is equal to NH by 2 pi, right? Now, you have to substitute the radius of the third orbit here, right? So, if I do that, right? So, basically, I have MV into 9x is equal to NH by 2 pi, right? So, now this, okay, if I go for this lambda equation, basically, I'm going to have H divided by mv. So this mv is what is here. Now I can rewrite this as 9x, or what? Oh, sorry, mv is equal to nh by 2 into 9 will become 18 pi x, Okay, NH by 18 pi x. Okay, now let me substitute it here. So H divided by, now N is 3, right? And this is talking about the third orbit. Okay, so I have, so I can even substitute N value as 3, right? So 3 and 18 will go 6 times. Okay, so basically I have H by 6 pi x. Okay, so what will happen? It will become 6 pi x will come to the numerator, H will go to the denominator. So H and L will cancel. Yes, lambda is equal to 6 pi x. Very simple. Okay, I told you 3 equations, 3 different formulas. So we use 3 different formulas and somehow I got the answer. Okay, pretty easy. You can just do what I did exactly. Maybe I just small, a little, make it smaller so that I'll be able to see it. Right. So R1 I found A naught, which is equal to X, which is given in the question. Right. R3 I found out to be 9x. Right. So if I go for MVR is equal to NH by 3 pi, sorry, NH by 2 pi. Right. I'm going for third orbit, so I write it as R3. So I in the lambda equation I have MV. That MV I'm going to write in terms of third orbit's radius, and that I found out is going to be H by 6 pi x. So if I substitute in the lambda equation, H and X gets cancelled. So you are going to have 6 pi x. That's the answer. Okay, I hope everybody understood. Right. Okay, guys, we have to do a couple of more problems. Right, we did almost everything we covered. We have to do some problems on quantum numbers, and it is going to take some time. It is going to, like, say 2-3 problems we'll do, not more than that. Okay, and then we'll switch to which chapter? That's the question. Okay, so we have completed everything almost. Stoichiometry is left, but stoichiometry, redox reaction is there. What else is there in this 11th class? I think that's it, right? And obviously S and P block, that we'll see later. Hydrogen atom, hydrogen we are never going to see. I'm not going to teach you anything. If you're interested, please read by yourself, because I have never seen questions coming from hydrogen. Okay, fine. So S and P block, we'll take it up later. We'll go group wise at the end. Okay, so only 2 chapters are left, guys. One is your stoichiometry. I'm talking about 11th class chapters. So stoichiometry, that is the mole concept chapter and the equivalent concept. Okay, and the other one would be your redox reaction. So which you want to see first? Do you want me to teach stoichiometry, guys?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Stoichiometry, maybe we'll just do problems. It is all about problems. You already know what is moles, you already know what is molecular mass, empirical formula, all these things you already know. So we'll just directly go for problems. I'll just solve some good number of problems in stoichiometry. Is it okay?
No, sir. There's some extra concepts and all in the stoichiometry chapter. So.
Extra concepts, equivalent concept I'll definitely teach you, because equivalent concept you might not know. Okay, the number of equivalents, normality, all these things I'll teach you. What else you want me to teach? There is about stoichiometry is basically, we already did stoichiometry in equilibrium, in the sense that 1 mole of this gives how many moles of that. All these things we already did. And what else is there? Normality calculation. I mean, concentration calculations. How do you calculate molality? All these things. It's just formulas. That's what I'm telling. So with problems, I'll be able to help you out. Normality, I mean, equivalent concept, I'll properly teach you. Right, but other than that, I don't think there is a need for me to teach everything, in the sense that what is the formula for molality, because you already again seen those in solutions chapter, right? But anyways, we will do problems, and if you're not able to do the problem, I'm there to help you out. Don't worry, and we'll cover everything in the chapter. I'm not going to miss anything. Okay, is that okay? We make a deal? Yes? No?
Okay, sir.
Okay, Varun, I think. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. I think everybody would be okay with this, right? And redox reactions, obviously, I'm just going to teach you how to calculate the oxidation numbers. You already know, but again, there are going to be special cases of calculating oxidation numbers that I'll teach you, and obviously balancing the redox reactions, right? And yeah, and nothing else in that chapter. So 11th class chapters will be over. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, after this we'll be completing, after these 2 chapters, I'll be completely covering the organic part. Whatever the reactions are left, I would have seen in the schedule, I would have mentioned remaining organic. Okay, so that will go for say 3-4 classes. That's what I'm expecting, maybe even 5 classes, right? And then we will go for your 12 chapters. Okay, so majority in your 12th is organic, right? So if you can complete that, I am left with solid state, electrochemistry, chemical kinetics, surface chemistry, metallurgy, right? So all these things. Among this, obviously, the electrochemistry, chemical kinetics are the most important chapters. Okay, so that will spend some time. Obviously, again, we're going to do only problems in that. But again, there are certain concepts which might not be there. You might not have studied. That alone I'll touch. Okay, fine. So is there anything else you wanna ask regarding this?
No, sir.
Okay, fine, guys. Thank you so much. I think tomorrow we don't have class, right? So we'll see, I think, on Thursday, right? Fine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.